Well, welcome everybody to the second session of Intro to Holochain. It's great to have everybody here, and I'll hand it over to Guillaume.
Sid, any context you want to set?
Sure. So session one, we ran through some of the basics, the technical basics of Holochain. We had a couple of conversations around what agent centricity might look like, and then we closed out with some tools to play with in Holochain and to understand Holochain better that Guillaume has been building out, called the Holochain Gym. And as we were closing out, there was just like like a barrage of questions that came in, which I think were pretty important and intense. So it didn't feel right to half answer them in the last 2 minutes. So we figured we'd spend about 5 to 10 minutes answering some of them. And so I will hand it over to Guillaume. But just before that, I will quickly say today's session is going to be about some of the projects building on Holochain. So we'll jump into that after Guillaume.
Sure. Are the questions, I'm just reading the post that you made, Caroline, in the Holochain forum. Are they the questions I should be looking at, or should we ask people to?
I think we should ask people to type in their questions. I didn't put the unanswered questions.
Okay.
That post.
I don't know if they might remember the questions, though, because it was very relevant to what Guillaume was sharing at that point of time. What do you think, Guillaume? Should we just pick them off the forum? I think I also saved them somewhere.
If you have saved them, maybe that's best, because like the questions I see in the forum are quite brief and they have an answer already also. So
maybe pick up one of them while I scroll through the text.
Sure. Okay, so this is it was answered, but I guess this is a really important point of confusion for people, which is, are there any live Holochain applications at the minute, or are we waiting on Elemental Chat, DocuSign, and Junto, which is not so much on the technical side. It touches on the technical side, but it's more about, okay, when is this going to be ready? And I answered the question with, we've been playing around with test nets for, I would say, years, actually. So we've been executing Holochain for a long time and making like it's working, and you can play with people around the globe and so on. The problem is that that's not accessible through a URL, right? Because if you are playing in a local testnet in which I only serve, I put up a node in my computer and I access it through like locally, that's not accessible to the outer world, right? So the technology is much more ready than it appears, just because the way that it works does not allow direct access through a URL like everyone is used to. So if everyone is used to being ready means we can access it with a URL, then that's the confusion that arises, right? And that whole problem or I don't know, situation with Holo being ready, which actually is now in its most basic form, which is going to a URL and having Elemental Chat showing up, that's being tested out right now. But it works. Like people have been providing feedback and so on, but it works. They are ironing out some issues, and they don't want a lot of people going and testing things out, like millions of people. So they are trying to do a staged release, I guess, or I don't know what to call it, alpha beta testing. But yeah, this is the situation, right? This is what we have, I think. I hope more or less that answered the question. And also, I think this is important context for everyone to understand right now.
Thank you. One of the questions that came up at the end was, what if someone creates a virus with each infected agent and it tries to cheat and render the agent disconnected from the network. So I think basically, what if the virus bumps people off the network? Would that vulnerability, how would Holochain protect itself from such a virus? Is that a vulnerability?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there is a degree that we don't know fully. Like every implication, there has to be security audits, and there has to be different things going on the Holochain code base. But one very solid fundamental that we can rely on here is Nix OS. I'm going to go a bit technical because I need to answer the question in this way. Every Holoport in the world is running Nix OS, which is an operating system in which you cannot execute a binary without first compiling it, right? So that's basically it. The thing is that everything that a Holoport is going to execute, it has compiled previously, knowing what the hash of the compiled thing should be. So actually no viruses can enter and be executed by the OS at all, right? Because if the virus is to be compiled, then like the Holoport should be the one actually asking the virus to be compiled, which doesn't really make any sense, right? So at least in Holoport LAN, we are covered by that. Moritz, you have a point here.
I think the only exception to that might be if Nix OS itself would be compromised by some kind of vulnerability or virus itself, and then it might have a problem.
Yeah, and then you are getting into where you bootstrap that Nix OS, which is actually going to Hydra, the Hydra server that Holo has. So yeah, like we have to see at the end of the day. Okay, battle test this. People trying to figure it out. People trying to infect it, doing the security audit. So we'll see what the result of that is. But just know that the Holochain team has been wary of that, and from first they have been deciding on NixOS, for example, to prevent these kinds of issues. I think you're muted. Sid.
Sorry, what would happen in the event that I lost my phone and someone used it maliciously for a day? Would I be able to get back into the network after regaining control of my device?
That's an awesome question. So Holochain has this deep key application or DPKI infrastructure, which is one of the most base, like I would say it's the most base and core Holochain app, in which you can actually revoke keys, right? So imagine my device is stolen, the private key never left my device, right? So what I can do in another device that previously they have been handshaking or something like that, I can actually revoke the key that was stolen so that that key cannot be used in any app. Actually, those keys, there would be multiple keys in there. So that's one way, and that is for Holochain stolen devices. For Holo, actually, the private key is not stored anywhere, right? So for Holo devices, and Sid, Caroline, Moritz, Matthew, if I'm going too deep or too technical, and I should like point me in the right direction, because I have a hard time knowing where to stop. In the Holo case, the private key is actually generated inside the browser. So from an email and password, there is some technical magic there, but the private key is generated in the browser and actually is never persisted. So even if your device gets stolen, they won't find any private keys because they were not persisted there.
Cool. Maybe we can take one last question. Is there a way to set the confirmations on Holochain for each app? As in, for financial apps, we may need more peer validation compared to less stringent apps. I guess that's a redundancy factor they mean, but yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the answer here is we'll see where we land exactly. At first, Art and the Holochain team we're talking about in the Redux days, like 2 years ago, we're talking about a configurable redundancy factor in which you say, okay, 25 nodes have to validate the entry, or 50 nodes have to validate the entry. Now it's not so clear because the amount of complexity involved in you as a Holochain developer tweaking that parameter may compromise security much more than expected, right? So imagine if we say, if the developer says, no, only 10 devices need to validate this entry, but only 10 devices exist in the network, or there are 5 devices that exist in the network, then the developer is assuming 10 when actually there's only 5. So those all those trade-offs are changing on runtime of the application, right? Not on development time or like as a decision of the hub developer. So it's possible that we have some configuration power in this, but it hasn't settled yet. I don't know. Sorry.
What do you think it'll be? Will we have templates or will it just be fixed? We don't know that.
Maybe what you will be able to set is strategies. So I imagine, okay, there is the dynamic strategy, sorry, that is not a set number, but allows a dynamic set of peers. So if the network is quite small, maybe that set of peers expands from 25 to 30. The strategies are what's most like what would make more sense for me, but again, this is totally speculative. Sorry.
You're not the spokesperson for the company, so
yeah. Like this is what it would make sense for me to implement, but I don't know.
Fair enough. Cool. Should we? Maybe we should wrap it up there. Since Game, I know you have another meeting to hop onto. And we can move into some of the content, which is talking about the projects building on Holochain. Cool. Awesome.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
All.
Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Sil. I'm excited to keep seeing you around, everyone, at the Holochain community.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Awesome. Guillem, what's the best way to find you on the forum?
Yeah, on the forum, I'm Guillem Cordova. You can find me. I'm also like hanging in different, like if you go see Holochain GitHubs, you can find me. Also, lots of modules here, like a bit all over the place. But the forum is the best one-shot stop, I guess.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.
Awesome. So we will jump right into it. We're running through a few projects today. Let me just pull up my presentation. Give me a sec. Oops. Cool. Is my screen visible? Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
We see the presenter mode. Yeah.
Yeah.
Might not, because I feel like it might be helpful to just jump through slides based on the kinds of questions that are coming in. Thanks, Said, for the little little annotation across the screen. Yeah, so is it visible enough? I think it should be. I've just left the slides panel open because I can hop across slides kind of conveniently. Yeah, so we'll talk about a few projects. The Sacred Capital, obviously, that I'm involved in. There's Kizuna, and so Tats will be coming in talking about what they're building with Kizuna. Michael, who's building the Reputation DSL, is going to be coming in too. And we might then just jump to overviews of some of the other projects like Adam, HoloRea, and a few others based on how much time we have. So I'll jump right into it with just a really quick overview of some of the things we spoke about last time. We spoke about three broad themes around contextuality, modularity, and bridging. And for those, and I think what was really interesting to me, and I think or has been interesting for me, and what we brought up last time was this conversation about contextual validation instead of consensus. And that feeds really well into the project I'm involved in, which is building reputation infrastructure. So maybe we'll jump into that first. But this point, which is Holochain isn't relying as much on consensus, but more contextual validation, in my mind, actually unleashes reputation currencies for the first time in a more in a pretty meaningful way. Because little bits of validation like receiving a like or an upvote or a timestamp that might be generated between interactions can now be validated and stored in a community's ledgers without too many costs associated with it. And I think this is pretty significant because up until now, or obviously in the traditional centralized system, as well as in blockchain, reputation data has always lived in the shadows of the monetary economy because it was always so costly to store reputation data, right? But with Holochain, you could have really small networks, maybe running just into the hundreds of thousands, that are generating data through the interactions, and might be creating these little blocks of data that we call reputation data, which can now be stored without too much of a cost. And what's interesting is that reputation data can now be used for different kinds of purposes. It might be sense making in some local way. It might be meeting and interacting with people. It might be deciding who to let into your community. It might be figuring out who shows up in a feed in your social media group. And so that's something we've always seen as very interesting that opens up within Holochain. And again, goes very well with these themes of contextuality, modularity, and bridging. And so modularity is critical because as we're building out some of this reputation infrastructure, we're not trying to build it out as a standalone app, but just infrastructure that can play with other applications that might be building in the ecosystem. And bridging is interesting because it means reputation data that's generated in one community doesn't have to stay locked in that community. Like, let's say Moritz and I have been sharing funny memes, and Moritz is also part of another community. He can actually disclose to that community that Sid is actually pretty funny too. And I would be immediately validated in that community because of my sense of humor. And so those are interesting little patterns that are developing within Holochain. And to me, that's very, very cool because that's just not possible in centralized tech. And so what we say is reputation infrastructure helps people discover, meet, and engage in distributed environments because you don't have the luxury of an overarching snapshot of all the users in the system. You don't have terabytes of data on each person. So if people are to start interacting with each other, they need some kind of social intelligence to engage with each other. So there's a whole bunch of theory around reputation currencies, but when we use the word reputation currencies or reputation data, all we mean is simple little timestamps or little blocks of data that are relevant in a context, that are generated in a context, and can be used to make sense for some community or some other purpose. And so we make this distinction between reputation data and reputation scores. So reputation scores are computations done locally. And so you might have a situation where Sid is generating timestamps because of his interactions with Catalan and Joshua, but Moritz might take those timestamps and make a computation of Sid is punctual or not. And so those are some of the terms and nomenclature that we use. So fundamentally, what we're talking about, what Sacred Capital has been building is known as a reputation vault. We're now having big debates internally about whether this is a vault or whether it's an interchange. So we might go with the reputation interchange, because what we find is reputation isn't like, they're not like coins that you store in a safe, right? And so vault was actually misleading for a lot of people. It's actually just a snapshot of reality in a particular context. And as you hop across contexts, like you have to reframe your lens. And so we might change it to reputation interchange. But basically what we're building enables small communities, or communities irrespective of size. It could be 500 people upwards into thousands and millions of people, to easily articulate their culture through a reputation system locally. And I think the most tangible, simple example of that is a group of people, let's say a community that is conversing with each other, having agency in ordering their own feed or figuring out who shows up the most in their community. And these are simple possibilities that just aren't available in environments like Facebook or any kind of centralized tech, because that overarching culture is imposed upon you. But with tools like Holochain, we can actually have communities, you could say it's a form of, some kind of sovereignty associated with culture, or the ability to articulate your culture. And so the reputation vault helps local articulation of culture. It helps sense making across membranes, which means I don't have to rely on information just that's generated within my group. And it's also way more efficient. And I'll talk about some of that in the next couple of slides. I'll rush through a couple of the slides here because I see Michael's also in, and he's also going to add on to this. If there's any questions, then feel free to unmute yourselves and jump in and ask a question. So, because I don't think we'll have time for Q&A after this. So think of the reputation vault as this social engine, right? And so it allows these communities to say, this is what we value. And so maybe in our community, maybe we're a virtual community using a social network of some sort, our feed is ordered on the basis of this computation or this simple formula. Like maybe we value likes, maybe we value really sensationalist content, maybe we value really high quality intellectual discussions. And so the culture graph of these communities obviously is different. And so their feed, for example, or how people are allowed into the membrane is significantly different. And so locally articulate the reputation vault allows people to, one, do it in a very easy way, and Michael will talk about how that works, but two, also constantly iterate with your culture. And this is important because that reputation score isn't hard-coded in the app code. It's actually held in DHT entries. And so for a community, say, we think likes are the best indicator of who's the best person in our community. And maybe a day later, they say, no, it actually needs to be like long-term upwards or downwards that are needed. So for you to actually swap and every day change and iterate your culture doesn't mean you have to update the app altogether, because updating apps in distributed environments can be quite tricky. So this actually lets you, in a very fluid, easy way, enter cultural computations. And we do this through something called the reputation DSL that we'll talk about. What the vault also permits are cross-membrane computations. So that example where Moritz could actually say, Sid is a really funny guy, and he should be valued in our community as well. Like you can actually have instances where, a simple example is meme communities, right? And meme communities might decide to fork from one another and might actually decide to start a new community, but instead of starting from scratch, where you actually have people populating or generating memes with absolutely, in an almost chaotic way, you can actually allow import of reputation data from allied communities. So you could actually say, hey, those 15 communities, I like their sense of humor, and I would like to allow that kind of humor to to gain significance in our community from day one. And it's not just virtual environments. You could also translate this into things like resource sharing. So think about couchsurfing or Airbnb or interacting or trading with each other in commercial ways. But this allows bleeding of reputation from one membrane to another. And the third benefit, or what the reputation vault tries to achieve, is efficiency, because you make like a computation made by one person in the group can actually be shared with the other group. So you don't have every agent in the network computing whose post needs to show up first. It can actually be a shared computation, which ends up being way more efficient in distributed networks. And so one of the conversations we've been having is, if you are moving towards distributed environments, you need to change some of these patterns of centralized architectures, because they tend to be very inefficient in distributed environments. So the reputation vault allows you to make queries in very small contextual ways, as opposed to, you know, trying to look for Joshua in a DHT of like 50 million people. You'll be looking for Joshua in much smaller DHTs of like tens of thousands of people. And so those kinds of patterns make things way more efficient as well. Yeah, so some of this content is up on our Git book. I'll share the link later. But in essence, the vault, think of the vault as, or the interchange, as a cultural computer. And what fits into the cultural computer really well is a DSL, a domain-specific language that Michael is creating that aids this computation. So maybe, Michael, do you want to jump in at this point in time and talk about what the reputation DSL is about?
Yeah, sure, thanks. Yeah, so the DSL is basically a language. So I'm building an interpreter for this simple expression language, which operates over reputation data types. So we have, here some examples, things like claps or likes, upvotes or downvotes, things of that sort, which probably many of us are familiar with in more centralized contexts. So this would allow articulation of that and communication across different distributed environments. So I think there's kind of two ways maybe to view the language. One is like more mundane. It's kind of like back office plumbing for the interchange, where data types come in and they're computed on in a way determined by a program, like expressed in that language. So the program says, you know, maybe take these likes and just count how many likes there are on this post, like a very simple one. And so interpreting that program, we feed in live data from some Holochain context. So it's translated into values in the language and then fed into a program and interpreted. So that's kind of the less grand framing of the language. It just does what is needed by the interchange. But like maybe slightly more significant framing is like, by virtue of being a language, it expresses some of the reputational essence of a community or some specific cultural context, I guess. And that way makes it kind of graspable and communicable and forkable across distributed environments. And so, like one example, Sid mentioned this example of a like meme sharing or a feed ordering application. Like probably many of us are familiar with Reddit and have come across subreddits with like very niche, deliciously bizarre culture. And it's true that they are very like kind of unique and different in their bizarreness, but they're still constrained by Reddit's algos to some extent. So the extent to which they can say, well, in this, you know, in this subreddit, we want like pictures of mountains with like cats in front of them and specific lighting, is they can articulate that to some extent, but it's still forced into like a Reddit-y framework. Here we might imagine, yeah, having more niche tastes allowed by ownership and sovereignty over these reputational computations. So yeah, hopefully that makes some sense.
Thanks. I think I see Tats is in the room, so we can hop into Kizuna in a bit. If there's any questions that come up for people, happy to take them real quick around this. But in closing, I will say, like, the intention with Sacred Capital is, like I said, allowing communities of micro network to articulate their culture more specifically, and that their culture represented by, reputation systems that they might design for themselves. And in the past, or we've always had this conflict where tools or applications enforce a certain culture upon us, and we think Holochain is that opportunity where we can actually break free from that that enforced monolithic culture that apps tend to enforce, and making that really simple, doing it in a way in which what you're doing in one tribe or one community can actually has these bridges, these cultural bridges to thousands of other communities, so you're not operating isolatedly. Those have been principles for Sacred Capital. And while all of this sounds really esoteric, over the next couple of months, you'll see some of the applications of this. Actually, I might touch on that towards the end of this presentation as well, through a project called Neighborhoods, where, as code gets more modular, communities become the organizing principle as opposed to apps becoming the organizing principle for us. And that's, I think, one of the guiding philosophies for Sacred Capital. We have some questions. Will this come built in Holochain? Well, not really, as in it's not native in the sense, like, it's not being created by Holochain core. So this will be bundled. It will be available for any kind of apps or modules to bundle in. And so if you're thinking about any project, like, feel free to reach out, or you might see us talking about this more publicly in the future. But for your modules to benefit from this reputation infrastructure is very much the intention. So so it won't be native as such, but we think, or we hope, that more applications and modules will use this reputation infrastructure to enable their communities to speak to each other. Yeah, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tatsuya, who's, like most of us, longtime community member and founder. I guess founder is the word, of a project called Kizuna. And I'll let him talk more, explain, I guess, not just the vision, but also what some of the progress they made with Kizuna.
Yeah, thank you, Sid, and hi everybody. My name is Tats, Tatsuya, but you can call me Tats. And yeah, so we are working on a Holochain application called Kizuna, Kizuna messaging application. Kizuna is a Japanese word that there is no direct translation in English, but I'd say the closest two words that can describe it is deep bonds between people. And we started this project about, let's say, almost over a year already. And it's a distributed messaging application that we are trying to build on top of Holochain. And you can, as a messaging application, you can imagine other messaging applications that we've been used to using, like Signal, WhatsApp, and whatnot. And the attempt that we are trying to do is to be able to create a sort of a holochain application that allows any sort of sizes of organizations to be able to communicate with one another, whether it is hosted in Holo setting or as a local Holochain um, node or agent. So I guess I can show some. I'm not entirely sure as to what the audience would like to see. So if you have any questions about the project, please feel free to just maybe shoot it in the chat, or I can't see everybody. So yeah, so maybe that was the best way. I'm not entirely sure, but
Maybe
anyway.
yeah, maybe it's a guiding few guiding points. I guess for a couple minutes talking about like what you've been building so far, and I think it'll also help people here to hear about like some of the shifts you had to make as a developer.
Sorry, what again?
Some of the shifts you had to make as a developer.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah. So as some of the shifts that we had to make in building the application is, so in building a holochain application, we had to put more thoughts into architecting the application before even trying to actually write any code. And that is because in a distributed network, things that we usually assume in a centralized systems do not apply. And as a developer, we had those biases that we were trying to implement in Holochain, but wouldn't really work. And so one of those things are, for example, there's no, for example, in setting an identity for a user, you can't really rely on uniqueness of entry, uniqueness of that particular data in a distributed network. It's very hard to assert that, and so these kind of technical things we had to really think through. And so I think putting more thoughts into that is something that we had to do a lot, and we were able to kind of learn more about how each individuals kind of like connect with one another in the real world as well, because Holochain resembles a lot of that, I think. And so yeah, I guess that's one. Yeah. I don't know if can come up with the other stuff, but I think I would say that not coding itself in Holochain is not, well, relatively it's not difficult compared to architecting. Like getting the architecture right is the most, for us, it was a really important part of developing Holochain application. It's not really so much about coding it, because the Holochain development kit that is available in Rust right now is really well made, and it helps you actually write code in a predictable way, I would say. But getting the architecture correct is the one that you have to really put a lot of thought into, especially because you are dealing with a DHT, a distributed hash table, which is more like a network of distributed agents trying to cooperate with one another. Yeah, I hope that kind of gave some pictures as to the things that we had to focus on. I could also show some demo if that, I'm not sure if that is an
Yes,
appropriate thing to do right
demos
now.
are awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and also one more thing. Before I show the demo, modularity is also something that we had to think a lot about, right? In Holochain, kind of like the most, well, for us, the modules refer to on the Holochain side as zones, and these zones you can kind of like patch things together and create an application out of it. And in Kizuna, there are a couple of zones as well, as I show you in the demo. You may be able to see some of that, but in the future, it's really exciting to be able to I think maybe in the Sacred Capital section, Sid explained this more, but being able to kind of develop these kind of like widgets or modules and be able to patch those together and offer it as an app, not even like an application, is as a tool for a group of people to use it in their context. This is something really cool. And in Kizuna, we try to make those each features in the application as modular as possible so that they can be interoperable with other applications as well. So that is also something that was a great shift in our mindset. It's instead of building a monolithic giant application, like building modules is something that I think suits really well in Holochain. Yeah. Anyway, I can't share screen. I think, yeah, if you could allow me, Sid or Caroline, I'm not sure who. Thank you. So I guess just a quick demo before I end my session. So this is what we have right now. So there are 3 tabs in the browser. Right now we are running 3 kind of like agents or users in a more familiar term, I would say. And we can allow them to, so this is, I am running 3 agents. In Holochain, we refer to each node as agents, and we are running 3 agents right now in the locally in this Kizuna app, and we can make. Oops, sorry. How do I? There you go. So I made Alice, Bob, and Charlie, so I can add Bob. I can add Charlie, and yeah, we can send messages to each other like this. And how you doing? Doing good. We can send. Okay. We can send images, videos. So yeah, these messages and files and media files are getting sent into what we call the DHT, which is like the public place for Holochain. And yeah, so this is what we have right now. I guess this is a group chat. So this group messaging is one zone, right? So this is a module that can be ported into any Holochain application as long as there is an appropriate UI. So this is something really exciting because, okay, I will stop my sharing. There's also peer-to-peer messaging, but I think time is kind of like up. So anyway, how are the images stored? Okay, so images are stored as bytes, as little raw bytes in the Holochain DHT in the distributed hash table. So the idea is that the DHT is sharded among agents, and they hold those shards of DHT. I guess this is something that's going to be explained in the dev camp. But yeah, so they are stored by the agent. Well, right now they're all running locally.
Do you think over time there would be more efficient ways, like maybe some kind of file storage module would make it more efficient?
I think, there is a way, I think, actually, I think Junto is already doing it, but I'm not sure as to what extent, but they are using IPFS as well. So this is outside of Holochain already, but since they both are content addressable networks, I think they work pretty well. In Holochain, a note right now is that there is a max capacity of 15 megabytes as data to be sent in a single zone function call. So you kind of have to shard the large files as well if you would like to store those large files in the DHT. So that is an interesting experiment to do. And there is another Holochain application called PeerShare, which is being talked about in the series of videos called Holochain in Action, and they are doing large file storage, I think, by chunking those large bytes into small bytes and storing them in the DHT. Yeah, sorry, that was a bit long. Anyway.
No, not at all. No.
Yeah.
We have one more question. Joshua is asking if Joshua wants to do a video call within Kizuna. Is that going to be possible?
Right now, we are not yet thinking about group conferencing. Peer-to-peer calls, yes, through the combination of, well, another technology like WebRTC, but group conferencing usually requires a centralized server to be able to kind of like find out those streaming data. I think, and yeah, I think Holochain is not, I'm not sure about this, honestly, but I'm not sure if, since Holochain is an eventually consistent network, sending real-time data through Holochain means, I'm not sure how effective that is. Yeah, hope that answers the question. But we'll see, who knows in the future.
Yeah.
Can we have the
there is Tats, is your video public? The one from Holochain in Action? Because I saw
oh yeah,
it,
absolutely, yes.
So there's a video. Maybe we can link it on the forum, pop it into the thread for the pop it into the thread for the session, but or maybe Tats can share it right now. But there's like,
Yeah,
I think an hour or 2 hour long conversation around Kizuna. So if you really want to get into it, that video is a great one. So yeah, I would recommend getting in there.
Oh wait, sorry.
Yeah.
That's part one of the Holochain session, in action session. Yeah, wait, let me get the other parts. Part 2 and part 3. Yeah, so these videos, we go into details, like really details into the codes of Kizuna, how we build it, learnings, failures, mishaps, funds, and whatnot. So if you are interested, then
awesome.
This might be a great resource for you.
And Tats, are you looking at this, like if someone is interested and is motivated with what they saw, is there any way they should be getting in touch with you?
Oh, yes. If
way?
anyone would like to see the code, the GitHub is this one, sent just a link. The good way to reach us is, well, I'm generally available in the forum. So my handle in the Holochain forum is Tats Sato. So that's TATS_SATO. Should I type it? Maybe there. Yeah. And awesome. I think that's the best way for people to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Thanks for dropping by.
You're welcome. And happy to see everybody here. Wow, there's so many people. Woo! So exciting. So exciting. All right. Okay.
Very cool. Thanks, Tats.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Very cool. I'm going to share my screen again. And I think the best way to cover some of the projects, like some of the founders of these projects aren't here, but we thought it would be nice to still feature them because this is more just like a little insight into what's into some of the projects that people are building. And so think of this more as, I guess, like a springboard that you can go, that you can jump into that you can use to jump into different projects. So this is more just a snapshot of what's going on in the ecosystem. Some of you may have heard of the project Junto. They've done a couple of Kickstarter campaigns, very much along the lines of what Tats just showcased. And it's primarily been built out as social media tools. They also have a little test app out for a bunch of beta testers. which has been built on centralized servers, but more just to get a sense of like how how users are responding to it. But Junto again is going to be one of those Holochain based apps, and it seems like they're also going to be moving in this direction where each community or each group has their own private network or DHT, which they use to converse with each other. I would highly recommend following some of the progress, because what you're seeing with Junto is the actual evolution of it. Like you can actually see them go through this arc of going down the rabbit hole of agent centricity, and I think that is very interesting. They've been using this very interesting front end framework called Adam, and for those who don't know this, Adam, you can go to adam.dev, spelled as AD4M.dev, has been created by one of the core devs of Holochain, Nicholas Look, that you might know from some of the content that's been out there about Holochain for a while. But Adam is being built out as a front end framework of sorts, and think of it as a framework that, in my opinion, solves for the dream of perfect interoperability of the UI. And so groups of people, let's say there's a community that's thinking of moving apps, but doesn't necessarily want to lose data that they've generated, as well as friction between swapping front ends. Adam allows for that kind of interoperability in a very interesting way. So for those of you who are more technically minded, I would recommend going to the website and following some of the documentation that Nico's put out. But Adam's being used pretty heavily by projects like Junto right now. So Junto's actually documenting how they're using Adam. And so I think it might be an interesting one for some of you here to follow. And it's also, I would say, potentially going to flow into more, not just social media, social conversation apps, but also any other kinds of application that want to reduce the friction between or enable interoperability for their users. So I would actually recommend jumping into Junto and Adam. Another really interesting project that's been created by one of my close friends, Posby, is HoloRea, that's now being called HREA. And again, you can follow some of the conversations around this on the forum. Also check out HoloRea. So if you just type HoloRea on GitHub, you should be able to find the resource. But it's, as this text suggests, an internet age resource coordination framework on Holochain for operational management and accounting and economic networks, communities, and single business organization. That's really complex word salad. But in a nutshell, what I will say is, I think there's this really popular meme or phrase within Holochain, there's not as much an obsession with crypto, but more with accounting. And I think HoloRea is one of the best protocols I've seen for accounting in distributed frameworks or distributed systems. And this is really, personally, I found it really interesting, like within minutes of coming across it a couple of years ago, because I've, my background is in traditional finance, and in traditional finance or monetary systems, you have a snapshot of financial reality being pieced together by a few intermediaries, right? So if you want to know how well a company is doing, you look at its bank statements, you look at its sales records, you look at its government filings, and piece together a snapshot of reality. And so that's a very top-down way of looking at things. But the beauty, or what's beautiful about distributed systems, is you have snapshots of reality being captured by a much wider network of agents, right? And so that's actually information that is validated by the network. And so it's actually data points that you can use. And so instead of relying on like heavy, clunky intermediaries for piecing together data or a snapshot, you have that data coming in from potentially thousands of nodes. And so it's a beautiful protocol which coordinates that. And so everything from, maintaining records of activity to interoperability and therefore sharing information across organizations. And so you could potentially be investing in a company, but because of the HoloRea protocol, be fairly certain that the information you're getting is accurate because it's been validated by the network. And so I would recommend following HoloRea as well. I think what's most interesting to me is because we're capturing information or monetary data or material data in a distributed way, we see two things occurring. Like one, you capture a much broader stream of data. So it's not just financial transactions, but it could also be timestamps, for example, or number of fulfillments. And two, it reduces the cost or access to economic tools and brings that bar down significantly. So I think in a world like in today's world, access to frictionless capital is the privilege of a very small group of companies who have been able to stay within those networks, but HoloRea potentially brings that bar significantly down. And so you could have any group of people, irrespective of the size, benefiting from the transparency and accountability that distributed accounting brings. So I would recommend, if any of you are thinking about any kind of payment related, monetary, transaction related systems, HoloRea goes a long way in building in the distributed world, because it's not just about crypto, but like I said, about accounting. And I think it's going to play a pretty significant role in Holo world. But yeah, I think what I covered here were a few of the projects, and my sense is, as we're all discovering, tech is getting a lot modular, and so you're seeing more and more applications being built out as little modules that can plug into each other and play with each other. And so one of the conversations we've been having over the last, I would say, 12 months or so is we might see a little shift in the way things are organized, especially when it comes to technology. Traditionally, apps, we go to apps, or let's say something like Facebook, for a specific set of tools. So I go to Facebook because I want to share my comments and pictures with a bunch of people, but I have to make do with Zuckerberg's generic culture that's imposed on me. But in agent-centric environments, you see tools getting really generic. So something like Kizuna is a module that can be plugged into any community. And so that community actually has that sovereignty or agency in deciding what their culture is and who gets heard within their community. And so there's a big question about what is that organizing principle for distributed environments. Is it apps? My sense is it's not really apps. It might be, I would say we have no idea what it is, but you might see a bunch of attempts being made in this direction, which I think is very interesting because it's opening up avenues for new ways of social coordination. So one of the projects that I'm involved with that's rolling out later this year is called Neighborhoods, which basically takes this meme of specific culture and generic tools and kind of allows communities to stitch together their networks using generic tools to engage, discover, and interact with each other in interesting ways. And so some of that material will be with, I guess I'm just sharing the really raw version with you all. I guess it'll be shared in a couple of days or maybe next week. But this is how that's taking shape. And essentially, Neighborhoods relies on a marketplace for tools, but uses some of the reputation infrastructure that I spoke about to allow communities to articulate their culture or their sense-making frameworks. And to me, that's really exciting about agent-centric environments. Like it's opening up, like I said, new ways of social coordination. And that might be a very interesting path to go down, because I think we brought this up last time as well. I'm not sure if I did, but I think what we also might start seeing this move away from like global markets, which is more about frictionless commerce, but more towards bazaars, which is commerce that's embedded in social fabric and very membrane-y. So I think that's some of the stuff that we're excited about within Holochain, or at least that's the kind of conversations that are forming internally. So yeah, I'm gonna.
There's a question in the chat. Can you put restrictions on your tools?
Lots of people are now ditching app. Oh, what kind of restrictions though? What do you mean by restrictions? Do you want to share? Alain, am I saying your name right?
Yes.
Do you want to unmute yourself, or do you just want to type it in? Or maybe I'll just take a crack at what I think.
Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was wondering, you know how, I know in Holochain we have more freedom, which is great. But in some situations, like in some recent example, we've seen it on Twitter. For example, when Twitter have to control some content, and they have to restrict people or ban people or suspend people. Sometimes people may feel like maybe they are allowing some violent speech, and they have to control those kind of things. So in Holochain, if you build a tool and maybe someone is using it in a bad way, are you able to, or maybe the restrictions will be built into the how you build it, so that way it will not be able to be profited by other people.
Sure. Yeah. I think that might be something Matthew or Moritz. Do one of you want to talk about this? Or I can just, yeah, go ahead, Moritz.
Yeah, I can give a little bit of a pointer, although it's not complete, I would say. There was actually an article on the blog, I think, about this subject exactly, written by Art, I think. I'll look it up in a second, but it basically was asking the question, would Holochain have been sort of useful for Parler, this sort of right-wing social network, to jump onto for hosting when they got cut by their hosting providers and nobody would take them. And so what Art, I think, was driving at in that article was that, yes, you could use Holochain to host the users or the whole social network, but it doesn't really get around the problem of, like, it doesn't make you automatically anonymous and impervious to consequences, because within Holochain, whenever you are doing anything as an agent, you are signing what you're doing and you're making your signature be attached to your actions. And that means that when you're doing something, it can be traced back to you, and you yourself have sort of put your signature under it. So that's one of the mechanisms by which sort of bad behavior is discouraged, or at least consequences can come to you when you do engage in it. And then, of course, there's also the app design layer, or the architectural choice of any social app, where there might be moderation functions within it, be that community organized, or a central authority, or even in the code itself, certain specifications of what kind of content or actions, or maybe even keywords, I don't know, would be disallowed or allowed. So, and I think there's also the whole subject of reputation, which of course Sid's work is focusing on a lot, which is the community-specific reputational metrics or mechanisms by which a community can discourage, prevent, or punish the actions or the type of actions that somebody might engage in that they don't want them to. So, but on the basic level, you can't prevent somebody from writing to their own chain what is within the rules of the app that they're running. Now, what then happens beyond that, that's up for discussion and for design, basically.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Marat.
It makes sense. So basically, you can use the Sacred Capital tools to build an app and then get the users to rate people. So that way, maybe if a person is misbehaving regularly, they get more restricted.
Yeah, that could be one tool, and one other one that I did fail to mention was also the membranes. So membranes being the boundaries that somebody has to go through to enter spaces. For example, the app itself, or also parts of the app. And so you can configure an app or a DNA such that you can only join that space if you fulfill certain requirements, and that those might be reputation, those might be approval by somebody else, those might be invitation by an existing member. There are a bunch of those kind of things. And then, of course, if you build your app or your network or whatever it may be in a way as that it has modularity, such that maybe it has multiple spaces that you actually have to get invited to, and you can't just access everything within it from the get-go, then you also have sort of the multiple barriers to increased capacity within that tool. For example, on the forum, a Holochain forum, although it doesn't run on Holochain, there's also different rights for different types of users. For example, if you've been there for a number of months or a year, then you get, I think, the ability to, I don't know, to upload video or audio content or images, which you were not able to do when you just joined. I think even links are discouraged or prevented for you to post unless you have, I don't know, 3 interactions or something like that. And you can have similar kinds of rules within Holochain apps as well. But then there's, of course, also the basic fallback that we're all used to from centralized services, which is to have an authority that makes decisions about those things as well, which you can always do too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marit. I see a question that's come in as well. I think it's Joshua asking about other universal rules within Sacred Capital that are enforced upon communities. Well, I'd like to think about especially the DSL that we're building as almost like grammar for the language, but actually expressing words using the language or constructing sentences is up to the communities themselves. And so I think that's the analogy. And so, yes, the grammar does play a role in how sentences are constructed, but the actual expression we don't have control over. So that's how we're looking at it.
I do want to add one more thing, though, which is the difference between Holochain and Holo in this regard, because Holo, of course, as a hosting network, has certain legal requirements on them to police the content that is hosted within the network. And so that's, I think, a subject that they've also written on. I don't know whether it's in the same article. I think so. But yeah, there's the question, for example, of child porn. If that were to be added to source chains on Holo ports, then there is a responsibility to delete that, for example, if it becomes known and visible. So, but there's also, of course, the basic protection of encryption, which makes things not immediately clearly readable. So then you sometimes don't know what the content is until it is revealed. That itself is a protection too.
Yep, that's, I think, an important point. I will also really quickly add, I think Holochain tilts things towards or rewards context over anonymity. And in that sort of a system, I think the kinds of behaviors that you mentioned, Alain, would be avoided more often than not, because there's rewards to building relationships and feedback loops that you generate. And I think when a system is tilted in that way, you hit that sweet spot of agency, but also promoting deeper relationships and context sharing. And I think that's been Holochain's political stance on this. Yeah, I feel like Matthew's spoken about that at length during the ICO days. Yeah, I feel like that is a good time to bring in a little survey that Carolyn wanted to share with the group.
Yeah, so I have a
you wanna
2-question little poll. It'll be in Zoom, and hopefully this will help make the future learning events and stuff we'll be doing in the next 2 months a little bit better. So everybody would just do this for about 30 seconds. That'd be great. Should see that.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, we are trying to figure out what can best serve the community now. Getting next steps.
Can everyone see the results, or is it just us?
Maybe. I think once we end the poll, usually you can see it. I mean, I'm seeing them come in real time about.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. We wanted to do something that I think at the end we can show everybody, because it's interesting to see where you stand in relation to the group. Or I find that very interesting. Could probably do Zoom polls all day. Okay. We only have 9 people, 8 people. I'm gonna give it 10 more seconds. Okay. I'm gonna end the poll. No. Can everybody see? Oh, I'm gonna share the results. There you go.
And the winner is start using the gym.
And
start tinkering with Holochain. Very cool.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Is real quick, Carolyn, is there something you want to share about which spaces people can join, or what or is everyone more or less aware of where they can have continual conversations? I guess the forum is what we're
Yeah, I would
recommending.
say the forum's the best place. You can join Holochain in Action, which are weekly dev calls that happen on Tuesdays in I think 6 hours or so from right now. That's the rough timing. So that can be found on the Holochain forum, and then any other events that I think would be relevant to this group will be on the Holochain forum. You can also go to our Twitter and follow updates there. So if there's any panels or conferences we're at, you'll see that. And then I'll be in touch, sending out all of these links and the recording to this. So you should all have that information. And yeah, we'll be publishing info about stuff in the upcoming couple of months. And please share your feedback with us and get ready for Dev Camp, which will be in September now. So.
Oh, thank you. And just real quick, Holochain in Action is hosted by one of our community members, Hidayat, which features a new project or different projects every week. And so the video that's shared is through there. And so you should be able to find the more details through the forum. But yeah,
you can watch all the
more conversations.
Hidayat led Dev Camp 2 or 3 times already. So he's pretty knowledgeable, and yeah, it's a great space.
Very cool.
Yeah. Thank you
awesome.
so much, Sid.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thanks, Matt and Moritz and Tats and Guillaume and Michael. And am I missing someone? Anyone else that I might have forgotten? And thank you all for showing up.
Yeah. Cool. Well, with that, we'll say goodbye until next time.
Thanks for putting it on.
Thanks all.
Bye all.
Thanks all.
Yeah.